I was born in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. My grandfather on my father's side was a minister, and my grandmother was a homemaker. And I didn't really know a great deal about my mother's relatives. My parents were Jenny Moliere and Glenn William Jenkins. My mother was a homemaker, and my father owned a small community grocery store. I can remember from my early childhood that he had the store, to the best of my memory. And at one point, when I was about 6 or 7 years old, he would put a stool behind the cash register. He taught me to count money, and I was his first cashier. But I'm sure today that could not happen because it would be violating the child labor law. My mother was a homemaker, and at one point in my early life, I'm told that there were 5 of us. I was the third of 3 children. I had brothers who died at a very young age, and after I was born, my mother passed when I was 6 months old. So at one point there were 5, and we ended up being just 2 in the end. There were like 5 siblings on my father's side, and it was like I belonged to all of them. My Aunt Lottie was an educator, well above out front when it came to education and making sure that we had proper nutrition, a good education. In fact, when I was about 3 years old, she taught at the Winston-Salem, was at Teachers College at the time, and she was in the field of child care and home economics. Took me to school with her and learned to read really at a young age, to count, and as I'd come home, I had cousins and I would teach them. They weren't too happy with some of the things I said to them because I thought I knew much more than I did really know. I participated in the laboratory school at the Teachers College. At that time, students who were in their junior and senior years had courses to prepare them for student teaching in the public schools there. So we were the ones that they worked with in their early training. I loved school, and I always have. Even until today, I go out to lifelong learning and just pursued education. At the high school, I participated in sports. For example, I was on the basketball team, swimming team, and during the summers, I was trained to be a lifesaver, junior lifesaver at the pool. And I think that I still love sports. I attended college in the hometown that I was born and reared in, Winston-Salem Teachers College. It's now Winston-Salem State University. My major was elementary education. At that time, that was really what was offered to us, elementary education. And then you could pursue home economics as another component. But I received my BS degree. The first school I taught in was in Boyd's, Maryland. And the headquarters for those schools in the suburbs were in Rockville, Maryland. So when I went for the interview, the person who interviewed me said, I got the letter saying that I would be assigned to Boyd's Elementary School. And I was just so excited. At that time, they told me what the salary was, it did not matter to me. They could have told me $320 a year, but it was like $3,200 a year back at that time. I was so excited. My husband worked in the city. I drove to board with a number of other young teachers every day. I did not get home until after 9 o'clock. Our principal would have meetings, long meetings. And I saw myself being separated too long from my child, because when I got home, she was tired and didn't want to, do her homework. My husband was helping with the homework, etc. I said, you know what? This is too far for me to drive every day. So I asked them in Montgomery County if they would move me to Rockville. They did not want to. They said, oh, you're just doing so wonderful out there. They love you, And I said, fine. I said, but I really need to move closer to Washington, D.C. And they said that they did not have anything closer. So I applied to Washington school system. And I was hired by the Washington, D.C. school system, placed in the laboratory school where we trained teachers, getting them ready to become teachers with their methods courses, etc. At the laboratory school, they then fed into the administrative system. At the same time, I was at George Washington University working on my master's degree. Before I got my master's, an interesting experience. I applied to Catholic University. And when they got my paperwork, having the name, last name, surname, DeLuz, they call you in for the interview. So I went in. I think they were expecting another Hugh, but I got a letter from them, and it said that we were impressed with the interview and and your credentials, but we are not enrolling colored students at this time. My husband encouraged me. He says, why don't you take administrative courses? It'll make you better in what you're doing, etc. So I did. And my name came up on the list after 2 years in the Washington, D.C. school system. They were looking for young, talented, teachers who had diverse backgrounds to work because integration was just kicking off at that time. So I was named an assistant principal first at Scott Montgomery in D.C. with a military, I think they go for training every 3 months or so. And after I was there about, I would say, 6 months, he said, you're doing fine. You can get help, but I'm going to leave you here to act as the principal. I said to myself, I don't really know how to be a principal, but I'll try, I'll do my best. He said, you're going to be fine. And I did. I worked that 6 months while he was away. And the following year, they appointed me to a principalship. I was ready for that, though. I had gotten my master's and all. And the most interesting thing about that was there were others in this school who had applied, and I was awarded the principalship. So I said, oh my. There were about 72 teachers there, and I had an assistant principal. When I went in for my first meeting with the staff and all, and greeted them, they were more mature, at least I thought they were, than I. But I felt confident, and The next morning after our first faculty meeting, I had a follow-up meeting because I got phone calls saying, they said, that little lady doesn't know what she's doing. She just got out of college. So I called them in. I said, well, I understand that most of you had an interesting evening. There were telephones ringing all over the place. Now, I'm not sure if I'm giving you the accurate picture, but I understand you said I didn't know what I was doing. You didn't think I was too young for the position. They had more experience, some of them. I said, but I'm it. I'm what you have. I was appointed the principalship, and this is what you have. I need your help. I cannot be successful without you. I said, but you need to understand too, there can only be one ship, one captain to this ship, and I'm it. And so, as a result of that, when I left there 7 years later, and they had a farewell for me, they had this big ship, and they got up to say, this little lady, they did like a, what was that? Yeah, and said, pretended they were me, how I came in. And then one lady said, you know what? I was almost ready to retire, but I said, oh yeah, she has this. But it was just like a wonderful experience. I'm telling you, it really was. I was a principal in the Washington, D.C. school system. We had the 2 children by then, a son and a daughter. And we lived in Washington, but shortly after that, we moved to Montgomery County. We had built a home there. And across the street from us, there was a teacher and her husband. Her husband worked for McDonald's Corporation. At that time, they had not licensed any restaurants to anyone in our eastern region. They were only would have, and especially persons of African descent, work in the kitchen, peel potatoes, and all of that. So right after the riots, they found that the company was smart enough to know we can't run these neighborhood restaurants because fires had been lit in many other locations, et cetera, et cetera. And the young man who lived across the street said, you know, you keep saying you want to own your own restaurant. You're not happy he was in the upholstery, canvases for cars. And he said, so why don't we talk to him tonight when he comes in? So a gentleman came in from Chicago, and he was invited over to this meeting to talk to them about franchising. My husband came home so excited about this opportunity and how much money and how many lives could be touched for our race if they could franchise stores to African Americans in their community. And I was half asleep, but when he started to throw around some of those numbers, and I asked him, I said, well, what did they serve over there at that party? I just want to know. I could not envision the economics of the possibilities, recognizing that it doesn't always happen that easily. But I said he had always supported, we'd just been a team all the way. And I said, but if you really want to do that, then we can do that. And he said, are you sure? I said, whatever we decide we want to do, we do it together. And so he said, fine. So we had an opportunity to apply. They accepted us. They accepted the couple across the street. And so we became partners in the McDonald's franchise. We were given the opportunity to go to Atlanta, to Philadelphia, and one other southern location. However, my parents lived in Philly, so we decided to go to Philly. And we did. I did not go right away. And he said, oh, come on, because I want you to learn the business. I said, you know what? From what I'm reading and the research, I said, this family has become accustomed to eating. I have a job. And you know what? Let me stay until you make some of this money you're talking about. So he said, okay. And I stayed for 2 years. He commuted. We got a house in Philly. We had the one in Maryland. And we'd commute back and forth until after the 2 years, and you know, things were looking. So I went to the superintendent. I said, you know, I think I need to go and help my husband. And so he says, you know, I can understand, we hate to lose you, but you know, and I did, and I moved to Philadelphia. I went to Temple, and I registered to go into their PhD program. But my cousin, who is an educator, we both were born in North Carolina, where if you were educated and you had the desire, you got a job and you worked. And she didn't want me to be at home. She said, you know what? Lippincott is looking for someone to work in their editorial division, elementary education. You have the background. Come on. I said, you know what? My husband says I'm retired. She said, don't listen to him. You come on. And I did. I went for the interview. They hired me. But I had them understand that I would not be just one as a token. I would really have to make a difference. And they wanted to know what I meant. And that was when I told them, I said, you know, in textbooks, and I've heard Lord mention this many times, textbooks, we always got the second-hand textbooks, never new ones, and it was Tom and Betty, but nobody that looked like us. And I said, you know, if I can really make a difference, I'll take the job. And I did. And they allowed me to go through their elementary books and change some of the language and change the illustrations to reflect what was happening then in like 1972. My title was Vice President and Editor-in-Chief of Language Arts. And when I first went in as a senior editor, and they would send me to New York to meet with other editors, and that was where I met Toni Morrison. She was a favorite. I mean, I read her Beloved, I don't know how many times. I never get tired of it. But that was good for me to meet, but there were only like 3 persons of color when I went to New York. But we bonded, and I came back, and the person who was vice president was going to leave. And they never asked me whether or not I was interested in it. And I thought, you know, I can do this. So I went to say to them, you know, I'd be interested in applying. They were surprised that I would do that. You're doing so well at what you're doing. I said, but I like what I'm doing. I can continue to do it, but I'd like to learn more. And I applied, and I was promoted to vice president and editor-in-chief. Traveled all over with their textbook division, did very well, exceeded what many thought publishing paid, because it does pay well. And that was how I got, you know, into publishing. My meetings with Toni Morrison were not a one-on-one. It was in a group, and she was more like our mentor. talked to us about the possibilities and the difference we could make in the written word, and the impression we'd have on children from a very early age through their lifetime, through writing and through being literate. We'd go up to the meetings, and then she exposed us to others who worked in colleges and universities. She gave me a lead to teach at the University of Denver Publishing School for about 6 or 7 years. I'd go out. It was only during the summer program where we would work with young college students who wanted to become editors, writers, etc. And I also had the experience of contributing to a publishing textbook through her efforts and her support of me. I left Lippincott reluctantly, and I labored over whether or not this was what I should do. However, my husband had 2 heart attacks at the time, and on the advice of his cardiologist, they thought that the franchise was a bit stressful for him because he was the one black that was left in Wilmington, Delaware, and only 2 in the whole southeastern, southern New Jersey, and Delaware area. So he was secretary for different parts of the group. He flew to Chicago often. He tried to run his stores, and he really did not have, we really, I don't think we're in a position to hire someone to help him, like as a director of operations or what have you. And I said, for him to be responsible for home and for the business, etc., he needed the support, my support. So reluctantly, I resigned from Lippincott. I came to Delaware to help my husband. He did the operations part of the business. I did the administrative part of it, payroll, and that part of it. But my heart really was not into it. My heart was into him and our family, but not into the process. But the 3rd heart attack, and when he had to retire, then the company came to me and said, we'd like you to come to Chicago and train so that you would have an opportunity to make a great decision about your family. We know how oriented you are, and it would provide you the opportunity to say, yes, I will we had 3 restaurants, keep our 3 restaurants and get the help I need, or choose what you love to do, which is education. And I said, okay, and I did, and I went, and I became an owner-operator. When I came back, I went into the stores, I learned the operations, and worked still with the administrative part of it. He became the person who was my supervisor. And although he thought he was, but I learned a lot from him, took his criticism, and he was just like so blessed that I was able to, along with my daughter, take over those restaurants, and we just like did wonderful things. When we start to fill out the paperwork and apply for the loan, we had 90% of the money. You had to have 100% because of some of the experiences the banks told us they had with, they didn't say it, but with persons who had never run businesses before. So I said, okay, then we'll just have to find another way to come up with the rest of the money. And we did. We had already mortgaged our home, depleted our savings. They had our children, you know, what else did we have? They needed us to work the store, so they didn't. Anyway, they called us one day from Wilmington Trust and said, Mr. and Mrs. DeLuz, we'd like to talk to you again. And we were, okay, maybe we. So we went down, and they told us that they were going to grant us the loan based on the information we'd given them. I said, wonder what changed that. After 7 years, we learned that some friends we had never met had come to the table because they had been pressuring banks to be more, friendly to our culture, to helping our communities, etc. And those persons were Jim Gilliam Jr., Jim Gilliam Sr., the former mayor, Jim Seals. And the former mayor, Jim Seals, was the catalyst, I understand. I said Judge Williams, didn't I?
No, you didn't say Judge.
Judge Williams. They did not tell us that they had signed to guarantee the other 10% for us to get this franchise. And the 7th year, after we paid it off, they showed up to take us to dinner one evening. And they told us the story. I said, but they were always in and out of the store, but I just thought they were in and out of the store to help us. But that was just like so inspirational and will live in my heart the rest of my life. It was an opportunity we might not have had if they had not stepped up. And that shows you the kind of persons who live in this world and do the kinds of things God would have us all do if we can. I would always attend the co-op meetings with my husband, and because I wanted to learn and wanted to let them know he had support. We were, at that time, the one African-American couple in the co-op out of the 3 states. And the first, I do not know who recommended me or put me on the ballot. They said, would you serve as an officer? Your husband is working already, would you serve? And I said, oh yes. I said, what would you have me do? They said, you will be running against a gentleman whose name is Tony McCalley, very wealthy entrepreneur. And I said, okay, I will. And I won that election. I was the first woman that they had ever elected to the regional board. Following that, one of the other persons who was a national operator recommended me to sit on the Ronald McDonald National Children's Board of Directors. I was the first female of African descent to sit on that board. And since then, I have been the first African American to have an award called the Lozelle J. DeLuz Award, given every 2 years to a woman, because I really felt that women, as smart as they could be, but for whatever reason, never could penetrate this system that was out there. And they did award me this. They're given, and that was the most humbling, shocking experience. I had no idea that this was going on. 10 awards were given in my name, and this will be the 11th this year. That was given by our region to the person who has the most impact on the system in the region for that particular year. The most important one is this ring, 18 karat, that was given to 18 of us from the national level. So 5 years ago, they recognized the difference that African Americans had made to the company, and because of our involvement, they rolled out the red carpet and gave the 18. These are original rings, the only ones they have in the company, they gave to us. The former mayor of Wilmington, Dr. James Seals, was a professor at the University of Delaware. I was doing a lot of community volunteer work. He was aware of it, and he and my husband had become, they knew each other well. And he said, you know, I would like your wife to come and enroll at the university. We need more minority students here. She's just what we need. And from some of what I had heard about the University of Delaware, I was reluctant at first. But Dr. Seals did not give up. One day I told him, I said, well, I have my cars in the shop. And he says, oh, no problem, I'll come get you. And he did. He was a supporter. He left the university before I completed my PhD. And one interesting thing that I might add, and this is just ad lib, but there was a professor on my team when I was working on my dissertation who said to me, I didn't write the way that they wrote at MIT. I said, well, I'm writing from my experience. I can document it from the literature, and you have an opportunity to work with me, but you can't change who I am. I have to be who I am and come from that perspective. So anyway, we didn't see eye to eye, and I had to make the decision, am I going to leave this university or let someone push me out of receiving what I've worked hard for and deserve, or am I going to stand up for what I believe is right? So I went to the head of the department and told him, and I said, this is just not working. And I said, so would like to have a replacement for him on my committee. And he said, well, you know, we don't usually do that. I said, but this is not an unusual situation. I said, so if that can happen, then, you know, I will continue. If it doesn't, then I'll need to take the next step at the university. And Dr. Trabant was there then. And fortunately, I didn't have to go to Dr. Trabant because they were able to take care of it. But that's just some of the resistance that you get along the way. And when I talk about all the good things, I almost have to say that life for me ain't been no crystal stair. Being a first in a number of ways, you know, you're always gonna get pushback. But you know what? I've learned to push back. I've had a blessed life. From a family of 5, to be the one person still, from the bloodline, still able to share my experiences, remain positive, have the support and cooperation from friends, and to be motivated and encouraged by an historian like you, Dr. Nutter. is just wonderful. I am a very faith-based person, confident, love my family, love education, love passing it on. And I've done that through a summit that I've done for 8 years at the University of Delaware. Only a higher being, I feel, could, be responsible for something like that. And I know the things that I can do, those that I can't, so I don't waste time chasing something that's gonna use up too much of my energy. There are peaks and valleys, and I learned that early on. My grandmother used to tell me, every day is not going to be a beautiful day, So you prepare for the days that aren't, just like you prepare for those that are, so you know how to handle it. So that's my life.